Well, welcome everybody. Today we have the honor of hanging out with Pepper, who has spent over 20 years in the beauty industry. She's created educational content for the largest beauty brands. She's an organizational psychologist focusing on safe workplaces, talent development, high-performing individuals, and teams. So welcome, Pepper.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you so much.
So I want to start and dive in with what exactly is an organizational psychologist?
Yeah, I get that a lot. So when you think of an organizational psychologist, a lot of people refer to the TV show Billions, right? So it is a psychologist that is dealing with issues at work. So I deal with people that are more what we would call high functioning. So I'm not dealing with personality disorders or depression or things like that. I'm dealing with a functionality that of your behavior when you're at work. So how are you relating to others? There's a lot of huge emphasis on leadership and those competencies and traits, diversity and inclusion. So when you think about like, oh, my work life stinks, I wish it was blank, you would want to call me.
So
amazing.
How did you go from the beauty industry into the transition into what you're currently doing?
It was really difficult. I was always a hairstylist in New York City, had a salon there, had a super awesome career that I was very fortunate for in New York. And I met my husband and I moved to Austin, Texas. And just the landscape kind of changed everything for me. I have two great, beautiful daughters. And so, traveling, I would be on an airplane twice a week. It just wasn't the right fit anymore. And I needed to figure out what was next. And, one thing I always love with the hair care companies is we would get these personal development sessions. And I kind of started to analyze a little bit of like, okay, well, what do I like about that? What does that look like? And they were more like people that would teach you like facilitation skills, things like that. I knew that wasn't what I wanted to do, but being a 25 year long hairdresser, I already was a psychologist. And I also had a bachelor's in psychology and clinical psychology to support me, prior to that. So it kind of, it really fell into place, to be perfectly honest, because I definitely spent a few years going, oh my gosh, how does this translate? What do I do next?
Amazing. I've always said that hairstylists can do anything they want because every walk of life, and the networking is just incredible. And so I love the transition that you've made. And I love what you just said, that as a hairstylist, you really become a psychologist too, because of having to deal with so many different personalities. I mean, you see everybody with hair, period, and so that's what I love. And my husband has always said, because it's funny, because he's a lawyer. He just retired from the law practice for 30 years. And he's always said the smartest people he knows is hairdressers. And it's true. And he said they're smarter than lawyers. They understand people. So can you talk to the hair industry in particular? Because Sean and I coach salon owners and salon leaders. And of course, one of the biggest things that we're dealing with, of course, is what you said, relating to others. And so kind of talk to them, give them advice of what they could do in their companies to kind of really gift that area of how to relate to others, so that there's better teamwork. Because I think that's the biggest challenge that we see is lack of unity and lack of teamwork.
Oh, ears are open, everybody, because unfortunately you're probably not going to like this. But one of the most valuable things that we can do as a manager, salon owner, business owner, in whatever frame that you're in, is to really assess yourself. Mm-hmm. Really look at what are your competencies, where are your blind spots, where do you need to grow. There's a ton of really great measurements out there. You can even create your own survey monkey. If you have questions that you would want to ask your salon team about yourself, and just make it completely anonymous and give them the chance to share with you about, what are your strong points and what are the areas that you have some learning, edges. Because really you can spend all the money in the world on team development, on structure, all of these things. But if there was this old book was he who stirs the pot, right? Like if your grandmother makes the soup and then you try to make the soup, it's just going to taste different. It will, right? It's that recipe, right? So if you're the leader and you're the one that's in charge of stirring that pot, it is going to taste different because of your skills, your competencies, your behaviors that you're putting into that. So you really need to be super open, and it's very difficult, especially if there are areas that you need to develop. But that would be the very first step is to look at yourself.
I love that. And when we talk about looking at ourselves, I think that a lot of that comes down to building safety with the team. So talk a little bit about
100%.
building that safety, because we all know that our team won't exactly be the most honest with us if they don't feel safe. And you know that there's something wrong if you ask them to rate you on a scale of 1 to 10 and you're a straight 10s, because none of us are straight 10s as leaders. Right.
That's so true. I'll tell you, to answer your question, one of the first things that we do, so I have a master's degree in organizational psychology, and now I'm in my second year in the doctoral program. And the first year in the doctoral program is the ugliest year you will ever have, right? It's always like the weeding out year, okay? And you hear that, right? And what happens is not only is the content very, very heavy and the work really difficult, but the whole year is spent having to analyze ourselves. And it's really difficult work. And so what helps that is creating this environment that's safe. So you have a cohort of 12, our class is 12 people, and we're going to be together through those 4 years. So in a salon, you have your salon team, those people are going to be together. So when the very beginning stages to start to develop psychologically safe workspaces, again, it's going to take the leader, right? Because if you've got 5 people on the team and they're doing great work and they really trust each other and have a great relationship, but then you have a manager that kind of infiltrates that and isn't as trustworthy, it's going to kind of demolish the whole structure, right? So how you might look at that, a couple things that you can do is, again, the surveys. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. You could put a jar, on the table after a meeting and just say, hey, after we're done the meeting, what was one thing I could have done differently? It doesn't have to be big, right? And then as a leader, you get all that feedback back, completely anonymous, and then you own that feedback. That is the biggest thing. Own the feedback, take responsibility for it. So at your next meeting, or you send out an email, or you have, a group text, whatever it is that you do, you might want to say, hey, thank you so much. Share gratitude for the feedback that they gave, so they feel safe in giving that feedback, right? Share gratitude for it and say, you can theme it. Let's say you heard 3 things repetitively. These 3 things really came up during that. I just want to thank you for that. Please let me know how I could make that better. And then put another box on the table, right? Always anonymous, make that safety. And you relate it for anybody that has kids, right? Especially, so we have a 15-year-old now, and developing that space that, if she's out somewhere at 15 and a friend's driving and someone's drunk, call us. No one's going to yell at you, right? Yelling is off the table. You will never be in trouble. It's starting to set that space up of like, if you share something that's important to you, you will never be in trouble for it. One of the key reasons people don't want to share in the workspace is because they fear retaliation in some place. They won't get promoted, they won't get the clients, whatever that looks like, they will be retaliated on. So that's the greatest fear. So creating that form of safety is really, really an important key.
Yeah, I love where you're going with this conversation of fearing retaliation, because we've heard that a lot, Sean and I, from, the people that we coach in our own companies, as well as people that we're coaching in the salon companies as well too. And so that's really powerful. What are some signs that you are giving off that people may feel that they're going to be retaliated against?
Tell me more a little bit, Tina. As far as signs, like for the person that said something that then they'll be retaliated against, or vice
I think
versa.
the leader, that way they know that maybe their team is feeling that way because they're not feeling safe. So again, it might go back to the fact that they're not being authentic and transparent with their own weaknesses, because one of the ways that Sean and I really work hard on to build that safety is to come right out with our weaknesses right away and let them know what we think they are, so that they don't have to feel like, oh, they're going to be blindsided if I tell them this, right?
Got it.
So, and then it starts to kind of build up a little momentum for them to say, okay, yes, this is happening. But then, I just did a salon retreat with my salon leaders, and I said, the worst thing that you could do is to share your weakness and not do anything about it, and to say, well, that's just who I am. I'm Italian, so I'm rude like that. So just deal with me. I've heard this so many times,
Hear that so often. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, it's a form of complacency, right? Where you're like,
Yes.
oh, I know it, I own it. Let's make a joke and shove it under the table because I don't
Right.
want to deal with it. So in terms of, knowing what that's going to look like in retaliation, it is going to take some level of self-awareness, right? And self-awareness is something that you would want to go through some sort of coaching and have some outside viewpoint to help develop that if it was an area that you were needing some growth in. But I think some things are just behavior. One you already mentioned is, if people share with you, let's say, for example, the temperature is too high in the salon, right? Everybody's saying the temperature is the wrong temperature, or the music is the wrong music. And you as the owner, oh, yes, okay, but you never change it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't fix it, right? That's things like that are going to take a separation, right? And then you as the owner, if you, I got to tell you guys, I've seen this more times than not, especially in the generation that I grew up in salons. The owner would say, F it. This is my salon. It's my music. My name's on the door. Wear a sweater if you don't like the temperature. Dress cooler if you don't like the temperature. That type of behavior is not going to get you to develop the type of successful, high-producing salon team.
Yeah,
right? If you're dismissive, and I don't even know what I would call that. It's kind of beyond dismissive. It's aggressive, and it's very self-serving, right? And that's not a team behavior.
Yeah, and I think that goes along with another. You just kind of sparked something that I've seen, of course, is the fact that I've heard a lot of leaders start talking bad about other players in front of their team members. And so that's like a sign of, if you're doing that, they're going to fear retaliation. They're going to fear that you're going to do the same thing to them. And so to watch your mouth when you're talking about your people, because they're going to think you're going to do the same thing.
100%. Whether you're talking about one of your employees, a client, a salon owner, you should never at a certain level, hopefully anybody, but you should never be speaking negatively about others ever. That's like step one. Let's put that on the table. Do that. Don't speak negatively. We can make like our little commandments, right?
And that is probably the hardest one to ever get by, because you're dealing with your own self-rejection, your own critical mind of, I was rejected by this client. I was rejected by the staff member. So I'm going to talk bad about them to other people, but they're keeping that in the back of their brain. So your team is.
And we all struggle with that. I know I have done that. Because I still work in the salon while I'm getting through my program 2 days a week. And I definitely have come into times where I see a client of mine who was a difficult client then in another person's chair. And things go through my mind, and sometimes they pop out my mouth, right? But how one of my techniques on how to manage those behaviors are to create what's the sandwich, right? If you guys have ever heard of the sandwich, where you put the positive, the negative, and the positive, right? So I would say, I'm so glad to hear that so-and-so has that client in mind. It's really great to know that that client didn't go somewhere else. It sucks and it really hurts that that client's in her chair. That makes me feel like crap, right? But I know she's going to get a really great service today, right? So that's how I just said something bad about her.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because it was something that's inside of me
Mm-hmm.
that needed to come out. I needed to let other people know that that wasn't cool. I don't like her, that she makes me mad, right? But I needed to do it in a really appropriate way that kind of was somewhat positive, right? And constructive. So those are great ways. If you need to let something out, say it in a sandwich.
Love the sandwich.
And what you're kind of talking about, you know, I love that you said you got to set that space up, but what you're kind of talking about is culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that, you know, you spend time focusing on culture intelligence. So I'd love to have you talk a little bit about the power of culture.
Okay, so that's a good one, because culture is very popular right now, and it can look in a lot of different ways. So cultural intelligence is actually the study of how individuals can be together, work together, occupy space when you have this merging of different values, different, subcultures. Either, maybe people might dress differently, they may have a different language, or even if they're all speaking English, they may have a different first language. And then how they interact, right? So this translates into a salon culture or a salon, environment, in the sense of, if you look at your team and you have I know everybody in the salon, we love talking about our millennials, right? Or, our next gens, or the different generations, right? So those are their own cultures, right? So how the Generation X's are speaking with the millennials, those are the components in cultural intelligence. And so cultural intelligence being the awareness of what I think and how I feel is going to be different from this person that is from a very different part of the world than myself, right? And being able to have self-awareness and find a common ground of where you both meet, so that you can so you can grow and work together. And there's tremendous amount of research on innovation and creativity, and how much productivity comes out of teams that are more diverse. The more diverse your team is, the more innovative and more creative that team is going to be. And I think this is an area, it's not per se my passion, but it's an area in salon culture, in our industry as a whole, that I know when I traveled, our country, I'd see a lot of the same people in a salon, right? Like a lot of the females might look alike, or, dress the same, that sort of thing. Just be aware of that as a salon owner, and bringing in different people. And it doesn't have to be gender or race, it can be age. Because we see a lot of ageism in this industry, where you might have a team that everybody's under 30. Have a 45-year-old in there. It's going to stir things up and give some different perspective. So I know I went off at a tangent, Sean, on culture, but I wanted to kind of define for you, like, cultural intelligence versus the salon culture and what we're creating in each of our spaces. And those are, salon culture and a business's own individual culture are very unique, and they're all going to be very different. And the great thing about culture is it can change, right? So if there's something that doesn't feel right, or there's a toxicity to a culture, that sort of thing, it can be changed. And it can be changed as easily as the things that we were talking about in the beginning of our conversation of a leader. If a leader shifts gears, it can change. If a leader is married, then divorced, that culture is going to change, right? Or vice versa. They're unhappy, then they get married and they're happy, culture is going to change. right? So there's going to be a shift in dynamics. And the dynamics part is really interesting in salons too.
Yes, very true. I would love for you to stay on a little bit, because I know you focus a lot on your training on diversity and inclusion, and that is an area, you know, I think this past year that really opened up Sean and my eyes that it's not happening in the salon world, so to speak, right? And so what's the solution here? And as leaders, how can we convince our leaders in our companies that we need a solution? Like what advice do you give to brainstorm this through, so to speak, to come up with solutions?
I think first off is to look at what does diversity and inclusion mean for you?
Yeah.
Right. Does it, and I'm going to be very candid here. Does it mean I should have a Black stylist? Does it mean I don't have any stylists that are, you know, Moroccan or whatever different cultures, right? And there's the reverse. I go to salons in DC that I know a great salon in DC. I think everybody is Moroccan or North African, right? They don't have any white people in there. So what, like that's not diverse, right? So before you get to that stage, right, because then there becomes this challenge around your hiring policies, right? Because then if you're trying to fill a spot, is that fair, right? Mm-hmm. Because then, you know, companies get in trouble for that. Is to really do the work as the salon owner and define what that means for you. And, you know, study. I know in my academic world in school, there are so many great books about looking at, you know, some of the issues and the deep stemming systemic issues. So it's just starting to be aware of like, oh, what are the systemic issues in a salon around gender, around race, around, you know, even use of pronouns per se, right? Like, are you going to hire somebody that is a they? Right? What does that look like? Does that make others uncomfortable? Raising their awareness so that person is included in, great, right? Why shouldn't they be? So as a leader, to create a foundation, because you had better make sure that you have a psychologically safe workspace before you start bringing in diversity, right? Because diversity can be so incredibly beneficial to a business, but if it's not held in the right space and the inclusion is not there, it can be detrimental and people can get really hurt.
Mm-hmm. That's so powerful. Give advice to salon owners how to get this started and what they should do to get started on this.
So I'm gonna go back to a salon I worked for in New York. It was called Paula Breck. They did a great job. I worked with such an incredibly diverse group of people. Yes, we're fortunate because we're in New York City. And so they just kind of cultivated it, right? But one of the things that I always thought was so powerful and I learned so much from was a friend of mine, his name's Yusuf Williams, incredible hairdresser. And he was in the salon, right? And as well as many other, you know, different ethnicities, race, Black stylists, that sort of thing in the salon. And it was a community and a culture that became created in that. And Yusuf himself, as the person, brought that in, right? So it was something that was separate from the salon owner. The salon owner welcomed it, gave him the support and the inclusive, you know, environment that he needed. And so, I mean, he pretty predominantly had a Black clientele, right? But just in bringing his Black clientele in, it then drew in other Black assistants. And then when the other Black assistants came in, they then stayed. And so it became this space, because I look at it as community, and I speak to, you know, other friends of mine in the Black community, and it's something that I'm always kind of curious about, because a lot of Black women like going to Black salon, right? There's a level of comfort, of inclusion that they feel. So it's sometimes the problem is that people, whatever culture or whatever, they might want to stay in their little silo, right? So we're looking at something bigger of like breaking those through. Right. So a salon owner has to look at the cultural components too of if I bring in this type of stylist, what is the clientele that's going to come with them? And what do I need in my space to support that clientele? Because the clientele is really the end goal, right? It's making the stylist feel great. That might be an easier thing. But will the clients feel really good there? And then will they spread that to their community that your place is a great place to go?
Yeah. So it kind of starts with one, so to speak, is what I'm hearing you say, right? Through that.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where we're at the point of, okay, let's brainstorm. What can we do? And I love the fact that you talked about create that foundation and define what it means to you. So to me, that's part of the first step too, of where sit down, okay, how can we develop more diversity and inclusion in our company? And I think every business owner across all of America needs to be asking that question right now.
Yeah.
And I think we're kind of all lagging behind because have fear of not knowing, what do I do next? What's my first step? So I feel like you're giving us clarity through that, Pepper. And I think it's first and foremost speaking with your team and sitting down and saying, how can we start this? What can we do differently?
That's right. It's just, having the conversations. And an idea came to mind, something that people can do, because just like, one salon wants something, so do many, right? And so connecting with other salons that maybe you would like to have more of that clientele, they would like to have more of your clientele, and maybe doing a pop-up together of some capacity, and looking at that and seeing how worlds can start to merge together and the power of that.
Powerful.
I love that you talked about hiring. And I know that you focus a lot on emotional intelligence. And I think that the hiring and emotional intelligence all ties into, inclusion and diversity if you're aware of that. So talk a little bit about the importance of understanding and knowing emotional intelligence.
Huge. I'm very glad to. I'm doing a tremendous amount of research right now on emotional intelligence, and specifically, I'm currently researching the relationship between hairstylists and emotional intelligence, and how more emotionally intelligent ranking hairstylists, those are higher in emotional intelligence, correlate to having more retention. So it's going to take a bit to get all these measurements, and so we'll circle back. But I really do believe a lot in emotional intelligence. So I want to kind of clarify as far as, emotional intelligence being another kind of trendy term. Emotional intelligence, in its definition, is looking at the social and emotional awareness, right? And the awareness is in yourself, and it is understanding your social and emotional awareness and how it relates and affects those outside of you. And it's in the moment, right? So we can be one way, something upsets us. How are we in that moment? How does our behavior shift? How do things change? And to kind of look at that in the beauty industry is massively, massively huge. And not only because we're dealing with teams, we have employers, everything the same that most people, deal with in a workplace, right? But we have clients, and we see a lot of clients every day, and those clients share a lot of, things with us that may either be very heavy or maybe, require you to hold a certain space for that client, right? All at the same time you're doing hair and you're actually, performing a task in a time blocked, positioning, right? So lots of fabulous things for hairdressers there. But the best thing that I can share of emotional intelligence is there's a researcher out of Belgium that was studying emotional intelligence and looking at it in different cultures. It's viewed differently, right? In every culture, regardless, we all have the same emotions. So if you watch Pixar's movie with the little people, and there's anger and sadness. I can't remember the name of the movie right now, but everybody in the entire world has the same baseline emotions, right? But when those emotions go outside of us, they are interpreted differently. And that's why we also look at the social component. So understanding when you're in the salon, this is huge. When you're in the salon, You need to understand when there's an other, whether it's the client, another stylist, whatever that may be, whatever their emotions are not your emotions. You have your emotions, they have their emotions. You are not responsible. It is not your business to know what their emotions are. You can have an awareness of like, oh, I think that they, might seem anxious right now. Great. But when those emotions come outside of that person and yours come outside of this person, they exist in space. You don't own them or take them or bring them inside. They're just something that exists in space. And I think that's something to really separate for hairdressers, because as a culture of people, they really, really take on a lot of other people's stuff. And hairdressers don't have the best boundaries. So emotional intelligence is a fantastic thing to start to build some healthy boundaries about what's yours and what's other people's. And that is just going to, it's worlds of mental health, of stress levels, of how tired you are when you leave work. If you get in your car and you don't want to hear a single other person or call your mom for, an hour after you get off of work, that's an indicator that you might need to set up some better boundaries there and look at your emotional intelligence levels.
Wow. Okay. This is huge, because in our salon companies, this is in the first 90 days, we take them through a book, and it's called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And so that's the first book we take them through. That way they can assess themselves in those areas. It's a simple book, so that's why we kind of go there first. And I think it's everything. It's everything. In fact, I was just talking to a graduate of mine, Pepper, that graduated quite a few years ago, and she just told me that she's getting out of the business. And I could read her body language. Like, she had some like anxiety and a little bit of fear coming out of her, but also frustration. And we're both DISC, DISC personality trainers, Sean and I. And so I know she's a high S, 100%. And every single person on our salon team has an S. And Sean and I are the only ones that don't. And so they're like the extreme, like empaths, sympathetic, they're servants, right? And so give us advice, give salon owners advice right now. How can we as owners help take responsibility for this education for our teams? What should we do?
There are a lot of resources out there. So there's a lot of, even just you're having your team read the emotional intelligence book. There's a lot of resources out there, because there's also a lot of different avenues that are helpful. There's popular ones. So emotional intelligence is an assessment. The one, for example, that I measure people on, if you were to ask me to find your emotional intelligence, I'm actually going to measure you on 26 different competencies, right? So there's some that might measure on 11. You've got DISC, where that's going to measure different traits. And these measurements are available now. They're very much available. So it truly is something that you could do for your salon team, is whether or not you all do it online together, or you hire somebody like myself to come in and do a measurement on people. But those resources are out there. They are helpful in starting to identify blind spots, strengths, and then when you can have, like, so the company I work with, we can put a team together, so we can put everybody's emotional intelligence scores, similar with DISC, right? And you can measure how everybody looks as a whole, right, within a salon. And that can be really, really helpful to start to navigate space. I know years ago, in one of the hair care companies I worked for, we would do these trainings, and you would, if you're a dove, a hawk, an eagle, go to these areas, right? So there are fun ones out there, and they're fun for team building, and that they're not a measurement necessarily, but it's fun. But looking for some resources out there as a salon owner, whether it could be a podcast, it could, it's somebody like you two. You guys are an incredible resource for salon owners to take that first step. And it could be as easy as reading a book. We were talking about psychological safe workspaces. That is the research of Harvard professor Amy Edmondson, and she has a fantastic book out right now, as well as a lot of podcasts out there. So I think really the first step is, as an owner, just starting to educate yourself on information that is outside of what's the norm in the salon industry. right? Everything that we're talking about here, talent development, conflict management, all of these things, these are norms. Every quarter, a lot of the stuff is done commonly in large organizations, but it's not the norm for our businesses, and it should be.
Yep, 1000%. It's great. This is a great first step. Share this podcast, you guys, with everybody because everyone needs this. What is the name of your course? How can people hire you to be a part of their programs?
So I have a company that I'm setting up, but if anybody just wanted to connect with me through Instagram, it's at Pepper Pastor, PEPPERPASTOR. And connect with me through Instagram because I do psychological safe workspace measurements, and I do emotional intelligence measurements, and it's something that we could do, safely over Zoom. If you want to do it over the phone, or you don't want to see face to face, I'm very, very strong on people's anonymity, and I can never say that word, but anonymity, to keep that safety for people. But I can let you know what your EQ is, and it's great. It's a 40+ page report that you would get, and outlining all of these different behaviors. And the nice thing, for those of you that are listening, that maybe this sounds scary, or maybe you're excited, but it's a little like, ooh, it's a lot to change one's behavior, right? But it's behavior. No one's getting you to change your personality. Your personality is who you are, your core, your values, right. But your behavior is changeable, and it's fine. It's okay.
So good. My husband would like that.
A great question just came in. When you have team members constantly placing emotions on you about burnout, other team members' work ethics, etc., I feel that I need to take action right away. What are some ways to protect myself emotionally too?
That's a great one. And what it's telling you, right, is, and what I hear from that is that something in your values, there's a lack of congruence, right? This person's values are not matching the values of the salon owner, is what it sounds like to me, right? The person that is putting the question in wants to take action, and the salon owner isn't taking responsibility for it. So it's not their role, right? It's not, they're not authorized to do what the salon owner can do. So one of the biggest things is just to ask yourself, why does this bother me so much? What about it is triggering me so much that I feel like I need to take action? And a lot of times what happens in ourselves is whatever we so desperately and like, oh, you want to do outwardly is what you really need inside. Does that make sense? So yeah. If you're wanting to do that for somebody else, really take an assessment. Why is that bothering me? Really evaluate it, ask yourself the question and say, what can I do that inside of me to make that change in me? And when that happens, incredible things happen outwardly, right? And so you gather yourself, and then maybe you can go to the salon owner and say, hey, what could we do? Or I tried doing this. Would this be something that we could do to help, this person or these issues right now?
Yeah, and as the salon owner, asking this question, what could they do to kind of set up maybe that, I like to call it a culture of safety, a culture of wellness, right? So that people feel safe to bring their challenges to each other. So they're not always going to the boss. So let me give you a case in point. We've had many challenges in our companies when another team member has another challenge with another team member, and they go right to their boss. They want them to handle it. And so for me, as a coach and as an owner, I'm always trying to coach them to go back and have that conversation with that person. And then I check up on them to see how did it go, right? Now, in the beginning, I might want to mediate because I might be a little nervous about why they might attack that other person. And so I want to be able to help them and give them feedback and to be able to say, okay, how could you have done that differently? So talk through that, because I think this is like an ongoing situation happening in salons right now. I mean, always, right? But probably even more so right now.
Tina, that's perfect. And you actually answered your question. I think there is a lot to be said about the beginning stages. I look at this as a parental thing, right? You are the parental figure, and you have maybe two siblings that you're disagreeing with something, right? So to get them to meet a common ground in a safe way, you're going to want to oversee it, right? Why are you going to want to oversee it? Because they don't have the skills yet. It's not that this one's this and that one's that. They don't have skills, right? We look at a lot of structural dynamics, like this is fascinating stuff, but the underlying dynamics of someone's family that comes into the salon or comes into the workspace. You see that often. If someone comes from a certain household that had certain issues, it is very likely they find a salon that has similar issues, and that the other stylists suffer from some of those same behavioral things that happened as a child. So they become siblings again. It's fascinating.
Wow.
And so because of that, there's not only a lot of power because they're together, at however many hours a week they work, but there's also this baggage behind it that has this intensity, and that you may see as a salon owner, that somebody's coming to you like, God, why is it bothering that person so much? That's really not a big deal. It may be a big deal because there's this luggage that they're carrying behind them that's been a big deal for a very long time. So two parts is one, exactly as you said, Tina, of moderating it in the beginning to give them the skills that they need to be able to have those difficult conversations with each other. If you as an owner are not at a place that you can do that yet, bringing in professional support to help you learn how to do that. And you might even, have someone do that one-on-one with you, and then they can even sit in on a salon meeting once or twice, right? And start to understand the dynamic and what's happening there. But again, just as I was mentioning about behaviors, these are skills. It's okay, right? If you don't know how to confront somebody with that, if it makes you completely uncomfortable, some people love confrontation and some people absolutely hate it, and it's the most inhumane thing for them ever. So it's a lack of confidence, right? It's just like, getting someone out there to cut a bob, that's not what they do. It's uncomfortable, and it's a lack of confidence. You need to build their confidence and give them the skills and the tools to do it. No different than any of the other techniques that we do in a salon.
Exactly.
Corey, I'm gonna allow you to talk. There you are. If you want to unmute yourself so you can go a little bit deeper on that last question that you had.
Can you guys hear me? I had to switch to my phone.
We can hear you.
Oh, awesome. Okay. I'm getting ready to leave the house to go to a dentist appointment, and I had to switch over. So what I did recently is I saw this as like a coaching skill that I needed to instill within the team. So we did a communication plan, and I talked about conflict resolution and, how to ask those open-ended questions about the sandwich technique. We did some role playing and things like that. And, just to give them a little bit of a beginning to how to speak with one another if conflict arose. And then if it went further, I could kind of be a mediator, So that was, but what I see is exactly what you're talking about. It's that lack of confidence, I think, or they don't want, because they work with these team members 24/7, if somehow they've made each other angry or upset within that conversation, I have to work with her tomorrow, And so that's kind of what I'm trying to let them know. They just kind of dump it on me, and they're still doing it, even though we have that conflict resolution in place. And it's one team member in particular right now. So I don't know. That's what's been really hard.
That is hard. And thanks for popping on here. And everything, you're taking all the right steps 100%. Just know that this stuff is going to take time. So two things I want to share with you is, one, it's going to take time. Even though that these are just behaviors, right, they're still deeply embedded. And, our behaviors are our responses to things that are deeper, right? So sometimes it's just not going to happen, you know, too quickly that you're able to unravel a behavior and instill a new behavior. But one of the things that you're doing that's really great is you're creating that safe salon space. And what you can continue to do for yourself is, I could hear that you're a little frustrated that it's one person, you know, that is repeatedly, is that, and that they're coming to you, right? So they're always going to come to you. So just own that and find what you need for yourself to grow and create the strength that it doesn't frustrate you or move you out of a space that you need to be in when they always do come to you, right? So it's kind of like you need to find your norm around when they come to you, on the one hand, and on the other, there's always going to be someone in the salon. It doesn't matter that it's that person. So this is sometimes hard to hear, but again, when it comes to the dynamics, if you think of a family structure, your salon structure, anywhere that you've been, that there's more than 3 people, you're always going to have someone that's like, you know, perky or happy, someone that's angry, right? Someone that's sad, because in a dynamic of a group of people, one person is always going to hold the space for something that makes others uncomfortable. So for example, if you got rid of this girl who was challenging, you will soon find in 3 to 6 months of her leaving, another one of your team members is going to fill her role. It may be different, it may look differently, but they're going to fill that space. So what's hard to hear about it is looking at what is her voice and what is this one kind of squeaky wheel continually saying that you can deeply reflect on. And I know that can be really difficult, but is there something that you could like pull out of them as a part of goodness that you're like, you know, there's somewhere in here, her squeakiness has a point, right? And then work from that place. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah,
hopefully it is.
That's really good. And something I want to kind of ditto on that is we hear a lot from a lot of the platforms that we're on is, why can't our team act like adults? But what they're really saying is, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to lead people. I don't know how to hold people accountable. I don't know how to have those hard conversations and to train them how to be a better leader, grow their emotional intelligence. That's what they're really saying, you know, deep down inside that question. Why can't they just act like adults? So can you kind of expand on your thoughts on that?
I think that we're in a new place and we're requiring new skills. When I was an undergraduate 20 years ago, my field did not exist. Had it existed, I probably would have gone into this. Didn't exist. You could be a clinical psychologist, or you could be in, you know, education in the school systems. Those were your choices. So when we look at our world, things right now, like Corey, what you're dealing with in your salon, 20 years ago, the salon owner would have been like, this is what we're doing. This is how it is. This is the behavior. This is how you're dressing. This is the type of hair you're cutting. You like it. There's the door. Goodbye.
Right.
End of story. End of story. Right. And there's still plenty of businesses that are operating on that. But, you know, when the millennials came in and things started moving and we started looking at, you know, quality of life, mental health, and then this past, you know, 2 years of or a year and a half of our lives now, these deep questions of humanity are coming to the table. And so they're being pushed into our workspace, right? So now as a salon owner, as a leader, you can no longer really hold the space and say, oh, well, if this one doesn't work out, I'm going to fire them. That's no longer like, what's the norm? The norm is like, okay, well, you're not a good leader. How can you make that person better? Right. And so I share this because what it means is these are all new skills that pretty much none of us have.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
All new skills. So that's why so many things are so, you know, popular and available to us, not only, you know, with social media and different platforms and these learning education, like the forums that you guys are on right now. You've got some really smart people in the world that have a lot of great voices and a lot to share. And, you know, just in doing this for 6 months is going to grow you immensely and give you those skills that you need. But don't judge yourself on it, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So good. Thank you.
Thanks.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And I know that earlier we talked about how they could get a hold of you, but I just wanted you, since we've talked about dynamics, I wanted you to kind of end with generational differences, because I think that that's, something that we're all seeing. And, like you talked about, we always are like, oh, Gen Z, the millennials, so how, kind of just elaborate a little bit on the different dynamics.
Yeah. I think, okay, so I want to share something fun that all of you salon owners can do. And Corey, if you want to message me on the side too, or through Instagram, please feel free. I want to make sure that you feel supported, and I just appreciate your, sharing. Is what you can do is own each of your generations. And what I mean by that is each generation is absolutely fabulous. They all have something wonderful to say, and they all have things that, make them a little cuckoo, right? So there's things that they're going to make you go nuts about a generation, but there's things that you can really lean on in a generation. So they have their plus and their minuses. Okay, so owning the plus and the minuses in each of the generations. And as a salon owner, there's two great things that you could do. You could either outline some of those things, and you could, I think what's a great way to do it is to engage your salon. So whether or not you have a meeting or something like that, or maybe like a special team building workshop, and a really fun one is to get each of the generations in a corner, right? And you're like in your salon team meeting, have the Gen Zs here, the millennials, have them each in the different spaces, and then get them to talk about what makes them really special. Okay, get them to talk about, the things that they hear people say that are like, oh, I can't stand that about, that generation. And you can also get them to share their experience of what it was like to grow up in that generation. Because when you hear the experiences of others, you really start to understand where they're coming from. So if I'm sitting and listening to an experience of someone in my parents' generation, and my dad came here from Hungary, we're Hungarian, on a boat in the middle of the night and would have been shot to death at, like that was it, and had to escape his country in the middle of the night. That is a very different experience than the fortune I had of growing up. And so because of that, my father has some deep, issues around, and I don't want to say my father, but that generation that dealt with that, deep trust issues. They will never trust anybody. They are complete patriots to America. So there's these really unique qualities and how they save things. So they tend to be hoarders, that generation, right? So that stylist that's from that generation might have a really, what you think is a messy station because you're very minimal, right? So there's these little things, these little nuances that you'll understand about them through understanding the experiences that they grew up with. For us, like seeing MTV for the first time or getting a microwave, like we didn't have a microwave, like that was new. Right. So there's some really cool things that you can bring together as a team building experience to help them appreciate some of the qualities of the other generations.
So good, Pepper. Thank you so much for this. Any last piece of advice that you've been dying to tell salon owners ever since you left the industry?
Oh boy. Yeah, I think go for what's out there, right? Like salons kind of, and I know it stirred up a lot of people during the shutdown and things of not being seen in a certain way, right? They couldn't get certain funding, or we were just kind of in this weird little no man's bubble. And so that's kind of my advice, is like other companies, other types of organizations get a lot of these skills that we're talking about, and don't be afraid to get those skills, whether you need to hire an outside HR person to do management and to do hiring for you, whatever that looks like. These are norms of other types of businesses. Allow your business to really thrive in the way that it should, rather than, oh, well, we're just a salon. No, you're a lucrative, amazing business that's a huge part of your community. And you deserve all of the other, all the bells and whistles that other businesses enjoy.
I love that so much, Pepper. Yes, you are amazing. Your husband is right. So we need to have you on more and again. Thank you.
Well, I would love that. Thank you so much. And I really enjoyed being on here today. And, feel free anybody to reach out to me as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.